Russia, a land in constant flux, a vast land, a land of contrast, both geographically and socially, a land of changing political values and regimes. Winston Churchill once described Russia as a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. From 1917 until 1991, Russia was one of 15 republics in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR. Russia was the biggest republic, covering approximately 3/4 of the entire USSR. Prior to 1991, half of the Soviet population, of 285 million, lived in the Russian Republic. On December 8, 1991, the USSR was officially dissolved, forever changing the face of Russia and its people. In what has become known as the Brest Declaration, the following was announced. We, the people of Byelorussia, the Russian Federation, and Ukraine, state that the USSR, as a subject of international law and geopolitical reality, is ceasing its existence. In order to understand the impact of this important event on the Russian people, it is necessary to examine Russia as it existed before the dissolution. Up until the 9th century AD, Russia consisted of scattered nomadic tribes. These tribes lived and farmed a barren landscape. In approximately 880, the first Russian state was established at Kiev. The state was short-lived, however. In the 1200s, Mongol armies destroyed much of the country. By the 15th century, the Mongols had withdrawn, and the country was ruled by a succession of czars. Moscow was the capital of Russia. The first Tsar was Ivan the Terrible. Under Tsarist rule, Russia expanded its territory and control until it became the largest country in the world. Despite its size and strength, modernization and industrialization eluded the nation. Finally, in 1917, the people revolted against Tsarist rule, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was born. Russia was one of 15 republics that comprised the USSR. The Russian Revolution of 1917 created the first communist state. Industrialization and modernization also increased after the revolution, though not as quickly as in the United States and other countries. Farms and factories sought to keep the Soviet citizens in food and clothing. Cities also grew. The capital city of the Soviet Union was Moscow. At the very heart of the city was the heart of the Soviet government, the Kremlin, a walled fortress containing all the government buildings. Also at the center of Moscow is Red Square. This is the site where all national celebrations took place. The name, Red Square, doesn't have anything to do with communism or the red flag, but is hundreds of years old. The word for red means beautiful in Old Russian. The Lenin Mausoleum stands at one side of the square. In it is the preserved body of the Soviet hero, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Newly married couples visit the site after the wedding ceremony and place flowers on the tomb. Lenin was the leader and founder of the Russian Communist Party and the Soviet state. Children learn about Lenin in kindergarten. They learn about his childhood, life, and political activities. Lenin's birthday, April 22nd, is celebrated around the country. Leningrad, the second largest city, is named after Lenin. Throughout the cities of Russia, we see the vestiges of the industrialization ushered in by Joseph Stalin. When Lenin died, Joseph Stalin took over as dictator of the Soviet state and ruled the nation with an iron hand, eliminating all potential opposition. In an attempt to industrialize the nation, Stalin introduced a series of 5-year plans to increase the production of coal and steel. While the plans were successful with respect to the modernization of the country, they did little to improve the standard of living for the Russian people. The industrialization, however, did enable Russia to withstand the German invasion of 1941. Russia became an important ally during World War II. Russian women played a major role in the fighting. The industrialization and modernization which began before the war increased, often at the expense of the Russian people. Following 1945, the Soviet Union became a superpower. The end of the war left the world divided into two separate camps. The eastern side, led by the Soviet Union, was communistic. The western side, led by the United States, advocated democracy. Both superpowers became involved in a silent, suspicious, and intensely competitive Cold War. During the Cold War years, there was little cooperation and involvement between the two superpowers. Indeed, each treated the other at arm's length with both wary respect and trepidation. The direct contact the superpowers had during this time was limited. Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin made a historic trip to the United States during Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency. There was, however, a great deal of indirect confrontation during this period. Decisions regarding world affairs were often made with the other superpower in mind. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 was an example of the indirect confrontation between the United States and the USSR over missile bases in Cuba. While there were a few instances of direct confrontation between the superpowers during the Cold War years, there was a great deal of direct competition. There was direct competition in the arms race. And in the Olympics. Children with particular talents are encouraged to develop their athletic prowess at early ages. Despite the fact that the Soviet government subsidized various sporting endeavors and even rewarded individuals for outstanding achievements, all Soviet athletes considered themselves amateurs. Health is very important to the Russian people. Daily exercise and a proper diet are encouraged. Medical clinics are found in all businesses. Healthcare was subsidized by the Soviet government. Despite emphasis on healthcare, drugs like antibiotics are scarce. Doctors are paid less than truck drivers. One of the best examples of direct competition between the two nations during the Cold War can be seen in the space race of the 1960s. The Soviet Union took the lead in 1957 with the launching of the satellite Sputnik 1. But it was the United States who eventually won by putting men on the moon. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became the new Soviet premier, and a new era of East-West relations began. Recognizing the need for change and global cooperation, Gorbachev implemented new policies of glasnost, or openness, between the Soviet Union and the rest of the world. In 1987, he signed the Soviet-American Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or the INF Treaty. This treaty greatly reduced the production and maintenance of nuclear weapons. This treaty, in addition to the Soviets' new glasnost policies, eventually led to the end of the Cold War. As the Cold War disintegrated, individuality began to flourish under the Soviet government. Indeed, individuality in fashion, at one time frowned upon by the Soviet government, was now encouraged. Jeans are always in great demand. They can sell on the black market for hundreds of dollars. Some forms of expressive entertainment thrived under the Soviet government. The Bolshoi Ballet Dance Company was founded in Moscow in 1773. It became world-renowned for its classic ballets such as Swan Lake. The Bolshoi Theater, home of the Bolshoi Ballet Company, offers a complete escape into fantasy. Ballet training begins at an early age and requires enormous discipline. The cinema was always a thriving industry in Russia. It is, in fact, a billion-dollar business. There are more theaters in Russia than any other country in the world. Each year, more than 4 billion tickets are sold. Lenin said, "Of all the arts, the cinema is the most important and influential force in the Russian world of entertainment." Under Soviet rule, war movies, especially about World War II, were extremely popular. Movies were designed to show the interest of every man in the common cause. Consequently, cinema heroes were more often than not common people, school teachers, farmers, and scientists. One of the major factors behind the change to glasnost policies was the growing realization that the Soviet way of life was no longer working. Despite industrialization and modernization, the standard of living for the average Russian remained underdeveloped. Indeed, food and luxury items taken for granted in other countries are scarce in Russia. Lines abound everywhere. Certain dairy products, like yogurt, are found in abundance on the shelves, as is Russian bread. Despite the fact that the USSR was one of the world's biggest cereal producers, it often failed to produce enough food to feed its own people. Consequently, grain had to be imported from other countries. Some stores, like GUM, are better stocked than others. Situated near the Kremlin, GUM is one of Russia's largest department stores. But GUM is the exception in Russia, not the rule. Internal strife among the republics of the USSR also contributed to its downfall. Riots erupted in Lithuania as some of its inhabitants demanded more freedom. Lithuanian residents in the United States responded. Like ancient Rome, the Soviet Union could no longer effectively control its vast empire. And like the inevitable fall of the Roman Empire, the USSR was declared dead on December 8, 1991. Replacing it will be a new Commonwealth of independent states. The principal co-founder of the new Commonwealth is President Boris N. Yeltsin. What will this new Commonwealth mean for Russia? Hopefully, a better standard of living for the Russian people. Only time will tell. One thing is certain: the dissolution of the Soviet Union heralds in a new era for East-West relations and global coexistence. The age of glasnost has been realized.